Welcome to Resilient in Business, a podcast where we dive into insights, strategies, and systems to help you build scalable, thriving businesses. My name is Jad Atwe. I'm an engineer, an entrepreneur, and a business coach. Our intention from this show is to provide value and inspire entrepreneurs to keep pushing forward no matter the challenges. If you enjoy the content, subscribe and help us spread the message. Now, let's get into today's episode. I'm very excited today for this episode. Today's topic is people. So we're talking about people, and I'm happy to be joined with Staci Drilling. Staci works at Jumpstart People, where they help with leadership, culture, team building. Staci, thank you for joining me. I'm excited to learn more about what you guys do, your journey, how did we get here?
Yeah, thank you. So excited to join you as well. I appreciate the invitation to be on with you. Yeah, so Jumpstart, we are, I'm a co-founder with Jumpstart. What we do is partner with organizations to help them build talent strategy, help them really define what good looks like in their organization. That could be through leadership development, executive coaching, culture alignment initiatives, and so forth. So we kind of do the whole gamut of executive HR, leadership, and support for their organizations.
What are the main problems that you're seeing people face?
Yeah, so I think what comes up most often, and I'll be really candid here, is sometimes people don't know what they need, right? They identify an issue that they say, hey, look, we need to really resolve turnover. And then when you start to dig in and start to understand, it could be a number of things along the way that really need to be kind of worked on and be more intentional about within their organizations as it relates to people and culture. And so I think there are a number of topics that are on a lot of leaders' minds. Often it is around talent retention. We just want good people to do good work so we can produce good results. And there's a lot that needs to be uncovered and unpacked in that for sure.
What's the process generally of identifying that here's the problem? Like that's the, because it could be anything. Like, yeah, I mean, do you guys have a specific process that you walk through a client to identify issues?
Yeah, so it's probably not dissimilar to the work you do when you start working with organizations around understanding exactly what does processing their business look like, right? And putting structure and systems in place. It's through a series of asking good questions. What is it that is the problem? Talk to me about when you are saying this, what does that actually look like in your business? I think one of the things that's a misnomer and that business leaders often try to do, they're busy. Lots of executives don't have a lot of time. So culture often ends up being one of those things, or people strategy, that's just what comes out is we just want it to work. We just want it to be fixed. Or we're here, we just need to get there. Can you just do it? But it comes through a series of asking good questions and understanding really what the root cause is. It's interesting, Jai, because sometimes that is certainly not where we start. Right? We start and the words that are brought forward are again, things like I'm losing team, or I want to have a good succession process, or I don't want to be the sole keeper of this knowledge for this period of time. And then as you start to uncover what they really mean, there's often other processes and foundational things underneath that first need to be structured. I think the summary is it comes with being intentional, right? It's just, you have to be as intentional about that as you are the other processes in your business.
Absolutely. And sometimes what you think is the problem is not actually the problem, right?
While I certainly believe that building a strong culture and strong talent is everyone's responsibility, oftentimes it's not everyone's area of expertise, right? And so similar to when you come in and support organizations to structure and help really stand up their business for the long term, it's similar with culture, right? You've got to be super thoughtful about what that looks like.
So let's talk more about it. Like, what makes a good culture? What are you seeing are cultural issues? How can we identify that this is a cultural problem, and how do we get about fixing it?
It's an interesting question, right? So you won't find an executive around that says we're okay with not having a great culture, right? Nobody's ever going to admit that verbally anyway. But it, again, as I mentioned, it comes down to being thoughtful in that culture exists whether you are intentional about it or not. You have a culture in your organization. It may not be the one you want, right? And so that then oftentimes is where the crux is. I think where I see leaders often go wrong is they read a great HBR article, they read something they see on LinkedIn, or they talk to their other friends and they talk about what their culture or their companies look like, and they try to copy and paste that. And that's just not how it works, right? Each company is made up of unique people, unique processes, unique skills and experiences. And it needs to be to have an intentional company culture that really feels authentic within that company. It has to be customized to that business or to that leadership team's intention. So whether you have a good culture or not is up to you.
Interesting. And what are some signs of a toxic culture? Like, yeah, how can you identify that this is a culture problem as opposed to a specific team member?
Yeah, so I think data helps, right? And I think, and whether it is actually quantitative or qualitative data, every organization has data. It just depends on how you look at it. If you've got a team or you've got a single position, if you're a small business, but you find a single position is continually turning over and over and over again, it's time to look at what's going on, maybe even in that team. Is it a leader problem? Which again, so goes the leader, so goes the team, right? So the culture is driven by their direct leadership. Sometimes it's a single person problem. Sometimes it's a structural problem, a framework problem, meaning, do we have enough people, right? Are we trying to put 2 and 3 jobs into one role? Are we saying one thing when we recruit people and doing another when they come into our organizations, which is often the case, right? We put all this beautiful stuff in our job descriptions and in our postings, and people come in and after about 2 weeks, they're like, is I meant to join or not? I'm not certain. So we have to really interrogate reality. Now, again, if you're in a rotten culture, it's not a great organization to be in, and you know that, you're certainly not going to say that in the interview process, but you can be really clear if we're on a transformation journey, right? Or here's where we are today, here's where we're headed. And so I think, again, it comes down to that authenticity around what are you trying to build? But I didn't answer your direct question. So going back to how do you know and what are the signs and symptoms, right? Do your teams work effectively together? Do you have internal fighting within your organizations? Is somebody trying to play politics and so therefore your business slows down and lags because you've got leadership teams or groups of teams not really working effectively together? I would say at some case, that's often a cultural issue, right? Somewhere we've allowed this behavior to happen. And so it shows up in a number of ways. But what I'd say is, got to just take an objective look at what's going on in your organization, especially if you are in a C-suite or executive role. You've got to be eyes wide open about what could be happening before you ever get to a point of resolution.
And what are you seeing mostly influences culture? Like, is it leadership? Is it the team between themselves? Or
yeah, so I have a saying that I say it all the time. So goes the leader, so goes the team. And what I mean by that is your culture is directly informed by how your leadership team operates. So if we have stated beautiful goals and vision and all the things, and yet internally there is a very different norm, what you're going to get is people's behavior to the norm, not to what you have as a stated vision and objective. And so that starts and stops with leadership. Whether you're in a small organization and that means you as CEO are all the things, that still matters. If you are in a large scale organization, you have a very complex and deep leadership team. Your employees are taking cues every single day about how to operate from how you interact with them or what they perceive that interaction is at a leadership level. And so that is critical. I mean, we like to think that as adults, we make a lot of independent decisions, and we do to a degree. But there's a lot of signaling that happens in our behaviors based on our environment. And so again, if you are in a meeting and people talk over each other, what you're going to have is a culture of talking over one another. If you are in where people are super respectful, even if that's not part of how you joined an organization, you adopt those behaviors. So it goes both ways, because subconsciously we all want to fit in. And so we will adopt and modify our own behavior based on those things.
Yes. So a lot of what you do, I guess, is it leadership training, like helping leaders like know that maybe maybe you're the problem.
It's really important. That's where that coaching aspect comes in, right? So sometimes leaders don't want to be told they're the problem. Nobody wants to be it, right? And self-awareness oftentimes is not the highest skill for some, especially interestingly, entrepreneurs, right? Or like people who've grown and built the business, because there's a certain level eagerness and ego that gets them to be able to build that business. But I think, again, good questions get good answers. And so is when a leader comes and says, this is what's broken in my business, it's truly asking those questions. Where do you think this comes from? How would you attract, and so getting to that, sometimes that self-awareness comes, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
And I would say though, that in that situation, until there is a true change in the leadership norms, there's not going to be a true change in the culture.
Hey, a quick commercial break. This podcast is brought to you by Business Optimization Partners, a firm that specializes in helping entrepreneurs systemize their business and transform it into a professionally managed asset that is scalable and easy to operate. If you wish to learn more, download the guide to running a professionally managed business that's available in the description. Now, back to the episode. Let's talk a little bit about building a team and how do we get about it. So my first question is, how can we attract the right people?
So again, you'll hear a theme, intentionality. What are you trying to build in your company? You're not going to attract and you're not going to have the same message to the market if you are in a startup, a really scrappy environment where people have to do lots of jobs, wear lots of hats, as you are in a large, complex organization. So your talent strategy has to be informed by the state of the business. Are you growing? Are you scaling back? Are you a new organization or are you an established organization? There is the right candidate out there for every job and every organization. Again, I think this comes back to authenticity. My message, if I am in an established, very what I'll call traditional type of business, the messaging that I have to the market, and by market I mean talent market, needs to mirror that. I can't use words like we would see in a tech startup, because you're gonna not, unless you're in a transformation, right? And you're trying to move ahead, you're not going to get the right talent and the right expectation from your talent when they join to make sure they feel good and comfortable. So that just, again, that's what I mean. It needs to certainly be that it is directly representative of the company that you're building. And so it can't be that we just, see how the wind is blowing and then decide this year that this is what we're going to do. It requires thoughtfulness around, what does this year look like for our business? What does the next 5 years look like for our business? When do we need to bring these people in? Is there a skill set missing? If we're trying to lead the market and we have no new thinkers and no innovative thinkers in our business, it's going to be really challenging for us to do that. And so I think a lot of leaders, Jad, unfortunately, and again, I know you see this in your work, will sit back and expect people to read their minds. They won't say that to you, but it is very much of like, well, this is what we said we were going to do. I just don't understand why our talent's not doing that or why we're not making any inroads in it. And you need to map out exactly what you want to see and build a plan to get there that you've shared and that each of your levels of leadership understand. So as they're bringing in new people, as they're onboarding people, they're able to cascade that vision for you as well. It's very important. And, I don't have an expectation that, as a CEO or president, you're going to know exactly to the T what's happening 5 and 6 levels below you. But through the right communication through, if you have the right touch points along the way, you will have enough sense of what's going on in your business to know whether or not you're meeting the mark or meeting your expectations.
That's a very good point. So what mechanisms should be in place to understand what's actually happening?
Yeah, so I am a huge fan, regardless of the size of your business, for the executive team to have, they need to have touch points to the lowest level in the organization. So whether that is town hall meetings where you go and you show up at a site or at an office, if you have disseminated talent and you're just walking the floor, you're meeting people, you're talking to people, you need to be visible because people will share, your teams will share. And it's really good, especially if you have a kind of belief that there is some difference between what we say we're going to do and what we need to do. People are ready to share in a positive way. It can be both ways. As a leader, it's your job to make sure you have a good understanding of what's going on in your business. You wouldn't run it without ever looking at a P&L. You shouldn't run it without ever touching base with your people asset as well. And so that's one aspect. Ideally, there is some kind of survey that is done on some cadence that gives you some specific data as to whether or not things are working the way you want them to. But I will say you better do something about it when you get it, right? So it's not okay. None of us, you will get responses the first time. If you're not do nothing or say nothing about what you're doing, people are going to be less willing to say something. And there certainly can't be punitive damages for the people who raise their hand and say, this is what's really going on. So I would never recommend that unless it's something I felt really that the leadership team is ready and open to see what comes back and do something with it. But again, I think it comes back to making sure they also need to have stated expectations at every level. So goals aligned, leadership behaviors aligned, and sometimes, especially in growing businesses, these are really fundamental touch points that get missed, right? We're growing, and it's kind of like that SOP that lives in Frank's head, whoever Frank is that's been here for 15 years, right? And we just know that the process works because Frank's here. As we grow, you can't be that way about your business. You have to make sure that it's very intentional. Yeah.
And to that point, I mean, if we tie it back to culture, how do we make sure that this talent that we're hiring would be a good cultural fit?
Yeah. So again, if it is, you are not going to know everything about everyone in an interview, right? They are said no. And I wish I had figured that magic bullet out. I have not. And I will actually tell you, the recruitment process and this song and dance of recruiting is probably one of my least favorite actually within human resources because of that, right? I'm not a salesperson. I don't appreciate being sold to and having to sell. So that there is an awareness there that everyone in the game needs to be aware of, right? As much as you want that person to, they want your job. They are going to say that they are fully on board with whatever you're selling, right? But you have got to make sure that through your onboarding process, your what I'll call an integration and induction process into your company, that those folks really understand what they're signing up for. You would much rather somebody sign out early if they're not on board with that than sticking around and causing problems or not really moving your needle ahead. But who you pick is going to be so unique based on where you are in the business.
What are you finding is the most effective approach when it comes to selecting the right talent?
So I'll put this in an if then, right? If you have emotionally intelligent and curious leaders, then it's a conversation, right? An interview should be a conversation. There's different schools of thought, in my opinion. There's different schools of thought. You can go, we're going to grill them. We're going to be so hard. We want to see how they act under pressure, right? Like, we're going to be kind of jerks in the interview to see how they respond. But unless that's the culture of your company, why would you ever torture someone in that way, right? And you're not going to get the best out of that person. If you have a company that is curious and open to feedback and all of that, then it's a conversation, right? Tell me about this. Hey, how would you handle that? And I am a fan of multiple interviews, potentially even multiple interviews with the same primary interviewer, right? So does Stacy show up the same each time? Right. And so you can sometimes in that get a gut feeling or understanding around whether or not that person and the company or the leader will get along over time. However, there are also some people who want to play silly tricks and games and want to do a riddle in an interview to see can the person critically think and all this kind of stuff. Again, don't do that stuff if it's not actually important to their job. So if they are going to be in a role that is routinized, processed, and consistent, you don't have them doing a critical thinking job. So there is no reason to do those things. And so at a certain level, though, sure, I also love it, especially at executive level and beyond. Can they present? So I'm a fan of kind of writing a business case study that they would then come back and present to an executive panel or something like that around how they would solve. It can be informed by real situations. It could be completely made up. But oftentimes with executives and when there's a miss with things like that, you may be placing someone who's actually been in the largest role they've ever been in. And so to start to uncover, can they perform and show up the way you and your organization want to? Don't assume titles mean anything. So, an executive director in some company could be a manager in another, right? It just really depends. And so what's important for your company? If they never present, and then that's not important, right? But if they do, those are things where people get a big miss sometimes.
In many cases, like people are becoming new managers, they want to build a team and they have so many questions. So what are you seeing middle managers? What problems do they face? How can we, what advice do we have like when it comes to team building?
Here's what I would say. The biggest thing is that oftentimes, especially if they've been in an organization, oftentimes we wait too late for someone to be blessed and titled as a leader before we ever develop their leadership capabilities. So the things that I see middle management struggling with is that we've not done the hard work up front. They're a really good individual contributor. They don't manage a team, any of that. And this is the age-old problem, right? This is not any new wisdom, but we unfortunately over promote them or promote them into not the right role, and they're not ready. And so what that ends up happening is in those middle ranks, they're not happy in their jobs. They don't have the skills to lead a team, to know what development looks like, unless they've been a recipient of that, right? So if they've seen it done well, it's easier for them to emulate. Or if you have a company that is, for your high potentials, starting to develop those skill sets early, how do you have hard conversations? What does a development conversation look like versus a performance conversation? How do you encourage? How do you reward? All of that matters. And sometimes we assume, hey, you're smart as a whip. You've been here a long time. You know the roles. You have been granted this promotion, right? And what ends up happening is person hates it, right? Because they don't have in their toolbox the right tools to be able to do that. And so start early, like with any and every, it hurts no one for people across your organization to have those leadership skills. And sometimes they're called soft skills, but I don't think that's soft. They're not soft. They're the hardest things to develop, right? You can't just give me a process and say, this is what you do, follow this. That's not how it works when you are in leadership roles. And so
they either hate it or they become, they start creating the toxic culture. Everyone under them now is just too stressed, is micromanaged, is just, it's a mess.
that happens, right? It's a very natural thing, especially when you are promoted from into your first manager job, because all you know to that point is you are responsible for either your portion of the team's output or you are responsible for your individual contribution. So you move from that into being responsible and knowing how to delegate, how to give feedback, how to assign work, how to do all of those things. The natural response oftentimes is micromanagement because it's all you know how to do, right? So that then creates friction with the teams below you, especially if you are promoted from that team. So you leave work on Friday and you are a peer. You show up on Monday and you've gotten a promotion and now you're the boss. That can be really full of friction if not done very carefully.
How do we navigate?
Again, I think, does that person what is the sentiment within the team? Is that a natural leader? Do people naturally rely on them? Are they seen as a true team player? Are they not? Like, it could be that you're trying to change the culture of that team, and therefore this person is intentionally selected as their manager to drive that change. That's a very different plan. And you have to be aware you're probably going to have friction. You're probably going to have turnover. So that turnaround type is very different than we've got someone who is the team already goes to them. They are part of a high potential pool. People know that they are a high valued contributor. The team, again, relies upon them. They're put on special projects. Then the team around them is going, okay, this person is probably part of that succession plan. But it really can be full of friction when it's out of the blue or a surprise.
So when should we start thinking about the succession plan and start building those talents or expertise?
The minute you have talent in the door. So again, if you wait until it's time, then it's too late. So if you are a small business and maybe you're an owner operator, you've been running it, you're now ready to start thinking about, even if it's 4 or 5 years, right? You need to be thinking about how you are going to groom the next person to take over well in advance. You've had decades of time to build your knowledge, expertise, understanding, and we often wait, and you're making an assumption that your succession trigger is in your control. And sometimes, especially with small businesses, that can be a real challenge, right? Someone's health declines, something unforeseen happens, and you need to have a fast succession or you need to have an interim succession. If you've not done the work up front, your business is going to flounder. And that's something that again, it's not even small businesses. Sometimes this is large businesses. And you see you will have a business that is out there really going gangbusters, growing and all this kind of stuff. And then there's something that happens with their leadership team unplanned, and there's nobody to step in, right? And so then that business goes through a really challenging time of turmoil unnecessarily. But I would say it's not even at the executive level. Succession happens, in order to do it properly, there should be, and it could be, you should have an internal succession plan, and you likely should have at least a profile, if not individuals that externally could be considered, especially for some of those key roles at the executive level. Again, don't put all your succession eggs in your internal basket. It could be that you actually need to be intentional and say, I got to get somebody from outside because this is not where we're headed. So, but start early. Don't wait, because again, you don't know what the future holds.
Starting to think what's next for this new hire, like how are we going to progress them in our organization? It's very important.
You brought up a good point there. It's also important for the person, right? Companies say, I want to have good retention and so forth. Most employees are not there just to collect a paycheck, right? People want to know that if I'm spending my time here, I'm spending it for something.
Yes.
And so if you are developing them, investing in them, when you have a succession plan, make it apparent to that person, right? So if you've got a good performance management process and you're going through and you've identified that Jad is the next successor, there should be a conversation with you to make sure you know, hey, look, you're on the list of successors. You don't have to say the successor, right? Like, you are on the list. And because of that, we're going to spend time developing you over the next 1 year, 2 years in these very important ways. You're going to be more willing to stick around when there gets time of stress, or that recruiter reaches out and tries to tap you on the shoulder. You're going to be less likely to take those calls because you know somebody cares about you internally.
Absolutely important. Yes. At the beginning, you mentioned using data. What do you recommend in order to effectively utilize data to understand performance?
There's company level data, broad level, right, around engagement and things like that you can use survey data for. You can look at your turnover, your retention. You can see some of these macro things that are happening or drill it down to your individual teams. Other pieces of data that can't be overlooked are, do you know what and talents people have that maybe you aren't deploying for them, right? So do you understand actually what experiences Staci has that maybe she's not in that role today, but she could bring to the table? That is a very important piece of data when you talk about talent. And you could have a skills index that is kept on a spreadsheet. You don't need to pay for all these systems if you're small. As you get larger and more complex, it probably is good to have more what's called a talent marketplace where you understand truly the skills across your groups. Another piece of data that's really important is individual metrics and team metrics. So does Staci know what her goals are? Does she have really well thought out goals? And do I meet them or do I not? Am I on track with my goals or am I off track? Again, as you start talking about collectively, you start rolling that up. If you're an owner or an executive and wondering why you may not be you get to the end of the year and you haven't met your objectives, if your team doesn't have clear expectations around the things that they're supposed to be working on or what their goals are, or you as a leader don't know, hey, we are 95% complete in all the teams on our goals that we established. If you start looking at that number and that number is in those low digits, even below 75% would be a number I would say. There's going to be factors at a macro level that impact whether or not someone can get that done. The business strategy changes, there's turnover in the team, there could be all kinds of circumstantial things. But again, if you set targets and those targets are what's driving but yet your teams for whatever reason aren't moving the needle ahead in the way that they need to, then you're not going to hit strategy, right? So it's just 1 + 1 = 2. And so that's an easy, and again, a free data point that exists in organizations, but often gets overlooked until performance appraisal time. That needs to be something looked at every quarter, just like your P&L. But even think about like your accounting team, right? It is there are certain things that need to be done each month on time, on target, in budget, etc. What is each individual contributor's role in ensuring that happens? Does it happen or does it not happen? Are we in a turnaround? Their jobs are different. There are certain things. It's not challenging when you spend the time to actually say, here are the objectives that need to be accomplished by each role. And then me as an employee and as a manager, I then can have a very different conversation with you around what you're spending your time doing, right? And how you are contributing. There's probably truly a small factor of employees who show up, get a paycheck, they're fine with that, right? But on the whole, I just fundamentally don't believe that's what people are after. And so again, if I have clear expectations, then I can move faster.
Yeah. And this is how you know if the entire team is actually helping you to move towards your vision. Like how else would you measure success?
That's right. And do you even have leaders that show up and there's 900 excuses each quarter why they didn't meet their objectives, right? That's a data point for you. One, can they not drive the accountability in the teams? Do you not have the right skill set in the teams? Is there not enough people? Are there gaps in skills? That tells you something, right? So being able to ask those good questions to uncover what's really going on as the executive team, or especially in a small organization where you may be doing it all, you are the accountability. You've got to understand what is going on, because if you keep accepting those excuses and you keep accepting, and I'm not saying be a jerk about it, right? But it has to be the right goals, the right metrics, and communicated clearly and consistently. But if your teams are missing the marks, then you've got other work you need to do there to understand what's going on, or your business suffers.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm reflecting on what you mentioned before about managers and how they affect the culture. In one of my first jobs early on in my career, a month after or 3 months after I was there, I had a lunch with the manager, and at the end of that lunch, she's like, "You're doing great. You're amazing. But I can fire you anytime," using fear to show authority. In my mind, it's like, what the stupid thing to say. It's interesting how some people have just no self-awareness.
And I would say that's probably one of those managers who they're not confident in their role, right? Someone has said that to them, therefore they believe that's the right way to get buy-in. But I know that there are other people out there that would say something very different in this. I am one of those people that believes you trust first, you give people the tools and instructions, clear roles, clear accountabilities for them to be able to do their job. Most people want to do the right thing. So again, in that situation, giving you your response emotionally to that manager is very different than if she had said, "You're doing amazing. I am here to support you in any way that I possibly can. If you skin your knees or stumble and you need help in another way, I'm here to support you. Let's talk about it." You would be much more willing to give of your extra time, what I call your heart, head, and your hands, right? You're going to be willing to give more than stay in line or I'm going to fire you, right? Like that's not very effective use of your emotional side.
I find that, and like sometimes they try to create like tension and competition between team members, and people think that this is a right way to actually motivate. It just has an opposite effect.
It does especially if it's done as a weapon, right? If you weaponize competition, if you have, a sales team they're competitive by nature. They're going to need to have some sort of internal competition, right? However, if it becomes weaponized of you beat this person or you're going to not get a bonus or you're going to be out of a job, they're already looking. Like you don't need to tell them that. They know that they're going to be looking.
Absolutely. So tell me more about your business. Like, what are you looking forward to?
I am really excited to be able to work with lots of different organizations that have a need. And while I'll leave it as that, have a need in their people strategy or in their talent. As I mentioned at the beginning, I love to ask questions. I love to uncover what really is going on there. And no two organizations are going to be the same. And so that's what makes this work fun. Again, similar to probably your business and going in and uncovering what needs to happen inside this business to make them grow and scale effectively. I just sit on the people side of that, right? And so what does that look like from each business? Completely different. That's exciting for my partner and I and our business to be able to lean into, to say, this is going to be really unique and this other business could be in a completely different spot. But our objective really is to ensure we're helping companies build, we call that building better together, right? So everyone has a starting place. There's no shame in where you start. If you're not aware of where you are, you'll never get where you're going, where you want to be. And so that's what makes this work fun. Even when companies come to us and say, like, we've got a really toxic place we're starting, or we want to get different, here's what I'm looking for, and you start uncovering it somewhere different, that's what makes it fun.
You changed my perspective in HR professionals. Like to see someone that's passionate and is there to help the people. It's just it's amazing. Thank you for this insights. If someone wants to get in contact with you, reach out, ask questions, work with you, how can they do that?
They can check out our website at jumpstartpeople.com, or they can send an email to connect@jumpstartpeople.com or LinkedIn. So you can always find me on LinkedIn. Just look up Staci Drilling. That's another great way to get in touch.
Sounds good. Thank you. And I will add your information. Any final thoughts?
I appreciate the time. It's been a lot of fun today talking with you. And yes, I'm glad I've changed your mind around HR people. We're not all evil curmudgeons sitting in a doom room looking to get people fired. So thanks so much for the opportunity to talk today.
Thank you, Staci. Thanks. Thanks for tuning into the Resilient in Business podcast. This show is all about providing valuable insights and inspiring entrepreneurs to keep pushing forward no matter the challenges. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and help us spread the message. See you on the next one.